Welcome to episode 4 of GMOs Revealed. I'm your host, Dr. Patrick Gentempo, and today's a great day. We start out with my interview with Dr. Toni Bark. Toni is a medical doctor who's also an activist in the area of GMOs, and my interview with her I think you'll find quite stimulating. What's also interesting about it is that in the next piece of episode 4, we have an interview with Mark Castell, and Dr. Toni Bark is conducting that interview on our behalf. Mark is the founder of Cornucopia Institute, which is an industry watchdog over the organic industry, something that is very important because we can't have lies and malfeasance. We have to make sure that what we're putting into our bodies is what we think we're putting into our bodies. So check out that interview. I think you're going to get a lot of great information and stimulation out of it. And then lastly, we're going to have a little bit of fun, but it's not uninformative fun. It's going to be fun that's going to teach you something. We're going to be doing a walking tour of Noni Land, which is David Wolf's farm out on the island of Kauai. And I have to tell you that after I sat and did that interview with him, which was in episode 3, we went out and did a walk, and it brought to life everything he was talking about during the episode. You're going to enjoy that. It's informative. The landscape is just so beautiful. And you're going to find out things about farming and growing healthy, clean, nutritious food that you probably have never learned before. Even if you don't farm or raise your own food yourself, you're still going to learn something that's going to teach you about what to look for when you go to the grocery store. So anyway, take that walking tour with us. You're going to enjoy that. This episode is sure to please. Well, I've been very much looking forward to this interview. So if you would just tell us your name and give us a brief bio sketch.
Sure. So as you know, my name is Toni Bark. I have a medical degree. I also have an environmental accreditation, and I have a master's degree in medical science with a focus on disaster management. I don't know that I was interested in the environment until I got older and realized what was going on. Mm-hmm. And then I had a huge interest in the environment, big enough to go study for my LEED accreditation. And, you know, what's been going on, we've been going in the wrong direction, progressively going in the wrong direction. And, you know, the GMO thing wasn't even an issue. Now, pesticides have been an issue for decades, mm-hmm. But it seems like the pesticides have become more of an issue with the onset of GMO. So going back to my bio sketch, as things have gotten worse, I've kind of branched out learning into other things. We
were fortunate enough that you were able to conduct a lot of our interviews because you have such a wonderful knowledge base and have such a passion around this particular subject. So thank you for that. I believe is important is understanding all the interconnections and synergies amongst all these things, because I think one of the challenges is that too many people are trying to isolate small details and not seeing the so-called big picture. And one of the things that you had said prior to the interview, which I think is worth talking about, is the implications that now they're proposing GMO trees.
Yeah.
And now that even widens the picture even more. So talk about that, please.
Well, so yeah, it really does. And I think that trees are one of those plants that people look at and admire, but don't really understand them as social beings. Mm-hmm. The trees communicate with each other. They communicate through their roots. They communicate through rhizomes in the ground. Forests are highly interconnected. There's a reason that some trees are very slow growing. They're the baby trees, and they can be really slow growing. And there's a reason for that, because the slower they grow, the longer they live. And part of that is controlled by the mother, by the parent trees. So there's all that. And then there's how they reach out and touch each other. Just what we can see visually, but also under the ground. They actually are interconnected, and if you kill one tree that's interconnected to another tree, often that other tree can die. Mm-hmm. They're much more complex than we know, and they're certainly highly adaptive. So the implication of a genetically modified tree for a specific trait is I'm assuming not taking into account, and I can assume that safely because I understand the GMO crops that have come before them, and they haven't taken into account the holistic environment and the life cycle of everything around those plants, right? So we can assume that that's how these trees have been engineered as well. They're for specific traits. Like if it's for lumber, I'm assuming growing faster, or, you know, there could be any number of reasons. So there's a lot of things that we're doing as humans that are disrupting the tree life cycle and their interconnectedness, and that is causing them to be more vulnerable to infections. And so we're coming up, instead of doing the right thing, which is standing back, listening, and studying trees and see what they really flourish and what they need in a long life cycle, because 80 years is a short life for a tree. We think of trees as only living 80 to 120 years because they're cut down in lumber at that age, but the truth is that trees will live on to hundreds and hundreds of years. There's trees that are known to be thousands of years old.
Wow.
I mean, they obviously know what they're doing.
Yeah.
They know what they're doing. They're living longer than we are.
And we need to coexist with them, that's for sure.
We absolutely need to coexist with them, because without the trees, we're really screwed. I mean, we need trees for oxygen.
And the whole point here is that they're looking to now genetically modify trees. So we get to a point where we're like playing God with with what's around us, but we don't have that omniscience to be able to do it.
Well, not only that, I mean, God, if you talk about God, whatever that means for you, it was an evolutionary long process with trial and error and all these other systems that adapted to each other. And so to think that we can just create different traits or better traits by bringing in DNA from other species, to think that we can do that and not affect everything else is wrong. And it's the mistake we've made with farming. And we're making the same mistake now with arborism, with trees. And really what we needed to do was to go backwards. Monoculture hasn't worked. Monoculture breeds infection. And instead of saying, okay, we tried this, it's not working, let's go back and try regular farming methods that we did years before that worked better, we're just going to create more and more problems. And the big issue is, what happens when those genetically engineered trees get spread and now affects forests that we rely on for oxygen, for cleansing the air, for cooling the Earth's surface, and affects them negatively in ways we can't even predict. I mean, we have no idea. It's just one big experiment with no precautionary principle at all.
What got you interested in the GMO issue in the first place?
Well, two things. So the health issue. I mean, pesticides are not healthy, and when you have a plant that's glyphosate tolerant, that means you can pour more glyphosate on it, and that is actually what's being done, right? So who wants more pesticides? So I understand, and these are herbicides as well, right? These are herbicides. They're actually antibiotics for the most part, right? They're disrupting anything that works through the shikimate pathway. People can say, well, that's not human cells, but it's actually all the bacteria that we rely on our skin and our gut. Our gut's responsible for making our neurotransmitters, for our immunity, for digestion, for vitamin levels. I mean, come on, how can you say that's not related? So that kind of got me into this whole GMO, but the other aspect is that this is being forced upon us. And it's an experiment that's uncontrolled and unfettered, and we have no idea what we're doing. And really, once you start getting the GMO seeds spread and infecting other people's crops that are supposedly organic or just commercial regular non-GMO, it's too late. It's contaminated. The contamination issue is huge. People don't realize that. So if, for instance, it's a bad idea and now everything's contaminated, we're done. We have no way to go backwards. And so when you make it so everyone's been tainted with GMOs, or just let's say Roundup, just glyphosate, and it's in everyone, now you can no longer say whether it's affecting people's health because we have no control group. And so that's another issue that for me is just horrible. This is fascism. This is, I don't want that. I don't want that in my environment. I don't want my children eating that. I don't want to eat it. I should have a right to say no.
You've interviewed a lot of experts about GMOs, some who are maybe pro-GMO and some or many that are against GMO. Can you highlight some of the interviews and some of your experience?
Yeah. I interviewed a Canadian, he was an agricultural financial advisor, and he was a very
agriculture financial, meaning he consults with farmers.
Yes,
or?
Yes, and how to make more money.
Okay.
And of course, that involved using GMOs. That was his argument, and that it's great for the farmers and it's great for people and they're safe, and this was his stance, and he was really And I believe that he believed everything he said. Okay, I want you to know, I don't think he was a liar at all. Like, I think this guy...
He was sincere in his beliefs.
Sincere in everything he said. But he didn't quite understand the concept of attributable risk, which that concept is that unless you compare an unexposed population to something you're studying, you cannot say there is zero risk. You cannot say anything about the risk unless you do that. They haven't done that, and I got him to admit that. But he didn't, he had never heard of attributable risk. He didn't know the concept. And I kept saying, well, if we don't have a controlled population where we have people who've not been touched by Roundup, let's say, then we don't have a way to study its effect. Because that's gold standard. You've got to look at a controlled population. And if we don't have a controlled population anymore, we can never make that statement, right? So that was a big problem for me with him.
Well, he's obviously a non-scientist, right?
Right, and he said that.
And you're going to have confirmation bias, right? So somebody who's got a vested interest wants to know the talking points to support their position, but when it comes down to the actual data, you're exactly right. This is an uncontrolled experiment that's released out into our environment. It is, something that is highly disturbing, and there's the two dimensions of it. I'd like to hear your view on both of them. One of which is GMOs themselves, in and of themselves, separate from what's sprayed on them, and then of course, the Roundup and other things that are sprayed on GMOs. What the effects of that is. So let's start with the GMOs in and of themselves. Some people, even in this program, some people said, I'm not that concerned about GMOs in and of themselves. It's what's sprayed on them that's a concern. How do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, because we all equate pesticide with toxins, so that's like I think a knee-jerk reflex, and I agree with that in for most people. And I am concerned about the pesticides, but Bt toxin. Let's talk about that. So that's a gene that's been inserted in corn, and it is, it's a gene activator or a gene suppressor. I mean, these fragmented DNA pieces that come from other species that are put in to turn on and turn off genes. Do we know that they're not turning on and off genes in ourselves? We don't know that, right? If they're turning on and off genes in pests, why couldn't they be turning on and off genes? We're closely related. I mean, our DNA, there's a lot in common with our DNA and our systems, right? And to also create genetically engineered things that change a trait in that produce, in whatever it is, a tomato. Do we know how that is going to affect us when we ingest it? It's not been studied. I mean, it sounds like just in theory it could be a problem, like, oh, well, maybe it's a small problem, but we really don't know. That's the problem. We really don't know. So while we do know that pesticides cause cancer, they kill our bacterial flora, which can create all kinds of problems, so we know that they're scary. So I think that's why most people say, well, I'm more concerned about the pesticides and less concerned about the GMO, because we don't know.
Well, and it's interesting that if there's something that is like this, that, again, once the genie's out of the bottle, you can't put it back in, and we don't know, then it's something that should be known before we go into it, right? And
well, that is the precautionary principle.
Yeah.
And
I mean, that would make some sense.
It would make sense to know what we're doing before we go do it unabated, right? I mean, I think it would make a lot of sense. And to be honest, I don't think that is something we could know in one generation.
There's little doubt in my mind. I mean, it's not even the distant future, but probably even the near future, this is going to look like lunacy. I mean, literally.
If there is,
lunacy.
If there's a near future for mankind. I mean, we don't, I don't know how far out future is going to go for mankind at the way we're going. Really, I'm not joking. I mean, it's, in a nutshell, we know the dangers of pesticides. So I understand people saying pesticides concern them more. And the herbicides. We don't know the real risks fully about the genetic modifications and the genes and the splices of the genes that we're mixing with our food. So we don't, and how that affects us. So we don't, that's more of an unknown risk. And so I think that's why people are less knee-jerk reflex, like, well, that concerns me as much as the herbicides or pesticides. Yeah,
well, I mean, all of it is concerned, and then some of the people that we interviewed, did cite some studies on in mice, that were fed genetically modified thing, growing tumors, et cetera. So there's at least some data to suggest this could be a problem.
Oh, yes. No, we know. Yeah. And if you look at when they were introduced, like 97, 98, liver cancer, which used to be very rare and really just related to hepatitis B, has exponentially climbed. So liver cancer is now, everybody gets liver cancer. We get young people. We are seeing cancer in people younger and younger. It's amazing how many stories I hear. 20-year-olds diagnosed with colon cancer. The cancers we're seeing at such young ages is astounding and is absolutely brand new. Mm-hmm. It is the new normal for the younger generation's training. It's the new normal for people in school, like in college. So what's going to happen is, as we die off, it's the new normal. People think it's normal, that it's always like that. But it wasn't. Mm. This is normal, yes, but it's the new normal because we're being poisoned on a daily basis.
Yeah. So now there's awareness around this, and it's a very tragic situation that has untold effects that we're discovering more about every single day.
Right.
Now you've got a mom at home with kids, family, etc., or anybody else, not a mom.
Forget that. Forget college kids going out to Thai restaurant or the local pub or the local restaurant or
God forbid their school cafeteria.
Yeah, absolutely, their school cafeteria. Can I tell you, it is amazing. I just went to visit my stepson who was graduating at Madison. I visit my son up at McGill. And and my son at McGill is hypervigilant, so he carries his own olive oil, coconut oil. He won't eat canola corn, so he learned from me, and but that means he can't go out to eat at a lot of restaurants, and we don't as a family. We go to very few restaurants. I call ahead and ask what oils they use, and then if they say olive oil, I always ask, is it pure? Is it extra virgin olive oil that hasn't been cut? Because most of the time, it's 30% canola. People don't realize that.
Wow.
People don't realize that. So I feel like these kids are at colleges.
Pause that for a second. So with so now somebody, because these are the tips I want people to get right now.
Yeah, no, they need to know
So now
this.
you're shopping in a store, you see, this is extra virgin olive oil. What do they need to look for to make sure it's not cut with canola?
So same when they look at their olive oil and their avocado oil. So in the stores, the extra virgin olive oil is not cut. Mm-hmm. In the restaurants, the stores that restaurateurs buy their big, the restaurant suppliers, that's the norm to have it cut. They know that. It's cheaper.
Right.
They pay a lot less. There's a little olive flavor. They can say it's cooked in olive oil, but it's usually cut with soybean or canola oil, one or the other. Wow. When you go to the store and you buy avocado oil, you have to make sure, whatever you buy, that it does not say in small print on the bottom, mixed with canola or mixed with soybean oil, because that is common. It's the cheaper varieties. People think when they buy, can I mention a store? People think when they buy prepared food at Whole Foods that it's non-GMO. But you know what? They use canola oil in everything. And only a few times do I see organic canola oil mentioned. Most of the time it's canola oil. Every cake they make, at least in the Chicago area, the West Coast might be a little different, like in LA or San Francisco where people demand different. Every single cake or pastry made by them is made with GMO, soybean, or canola oil.
So for the average family, what's the low-hanging fruit? The steps that can make that are massively leveraged that can make a difference as compared, because you can take this to very finite levels, but as a start saying, wow, you can gain a big chunk of advantage if you either did this or stopped doing that. What are the thises and that's?
Throw out your canola oil, throw out soybean oil, throw out corn oil.
Right.
If it's organic, fine, and you want to cook with it, it's not the best oil. Vegetable oils aren't good for you anyway,
But organic can still be GMO.
And it can't, theoretically, no. Mm-hmm. Theoretically, no. I mean, but we know that they're contaminated because we've seen studies. But no, there's an advisory committee at the FDA about organics, labeling organics. And if you own an organic farm, you can be on that committee. Well, what we see is these large companies that are not organic-minded at all, buying up smaller organic farms so they can put somebody on that committee. And what they'd like to do is have GMO stand for genetically modified organics. Yeah. They'd like to get genetically modified organisms without pesticides in that labeling. But as far as I know so far, that has not happened. And so when you see organic, it means no GMO. But is there contamination? Yes. Is a lot of canola oil contaminated, organic canola oil? Yes, it is. So that's a different issue. But vegetable oils are not good oils anyway. So just throw them out.
Right.
That's not an oil you should be cooking with. Use things like coconut oil or grapeseed oil for high heat, or sustainable palm oil for high heat, or organic grass-fed butter if you want, right? Use things that can withstand high heat. Avocado oil stands high heat. For your salads, use your olive oil, extra virgin, not cut with anything else, or avocado or walnut oil. Those are safe oils. Tell your favorite restaurant, I'm not coming back unless you can cook my food in something that's not full of pesticides.
But what you said is important. The fact that you ask about it or request, I think those requests as they come in start to change the behaviors of restaurants and others. I mean, I can remember, I was talking about this in another interview, but I can remember there's no such thing as gluten-free options, out in stores or restaurants very often. Now they're everywhere.
People think it's really hard to do. It does require vigilance. It does. We need to demand better. We need to demand it. And if people don't, then it's not going to happen for them.
Any other suggestions on the low-hanging fruit side?
Yeah, I mean, I think people have to think that when they eat farther up the food chain, meaning dairy and meat, that if they're not eating organically, because a lot of people think, well, if I eat meat, it's better than eating this broccoli that's been sprayed, because I can't get organic broccoli. Well, actually, you're getting what we call bioaccumulation. So if you're eating an animal that's been raised commercially, all the pesticide it's eaten over its lifetime is concentrated in its tissue.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not better. You're better off having the broccoli. You're better off having the cauliflower that's been sprayed than having the meat or the dairy that's bioaccumulated all this pesticide.
Well, you're making a really interesting point I haven't heard before, is that there is, as you're moving up the food chain, there's kind of another graph you can track, right? Basically saying that, the more complex or the thing you're eating or higher up the food chain it is, the more, downstream toxic stuff that might have floated up to it.
Well, yeah, think about it. I mean, the longer an animal's lived, the more food it's eaten, the more concentrated the herbicides and pesticides and chemicals and antibiotics will be, right? But I can tell you that cruciferous vegetables are more protein per calorie than meat. People don't realize that. So for your viewers, that's, cauliflower, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, kale, arugula, collards, so that whole family is highly proteinaceous.
So you basically alluded to this sort of potentially dark future.
Yeah.
And for obvious reasons, if you just follow the trail, you can see where it's going to lead, right?
Yeah, it's not a good place.
It's not a pretty thing.
No.
Is there anything that you see that gives you hope, that says that maybe we can recover from this? Maybe there's going to be a consumer revolution that's going to cause this?
Yeah, I mean, I think more people are waking up, and if more people are waking up and they're willing to make noise, then maybe we have some hope. It's it's a big country with a lot of people, and there's a lot of people who aren't awake, and a lot of people who don't have the time to be awake. That's a whole nother story because they're struggling to make ends meet. That's a whole nother story. And those are the ones being poisoned the most, usually.
And is that what you think the big corporate interests are counting on?
Absolutely. Look.
Ignorance is their friend.
And people say, well, the government or, the corporate interests would never want to make sick people. Really? Are you kidding me? Like it's in their benefit because the food and pharma are so inextricably twined together at this point that they benefit. They sell you poison. You're eating poison, and then you have a disease that you need to be on 3 medications for the rest of your life for. I mean, that's a perfect design.
Yeah. You
couldn't come up with a better design, right?
Everybody's got to eat.
Right.
And if we can cause that behavior to lead to the use of another product, then you've got a pretty perfect combination.
Right. So I wish I could say I have a lot of hope. I would say that people are waking up. That's great. If people were waking up faster, it would be way better because we're at a critical point. And we have to hold our politicians accountable. I mean, a lot of it comes down to lax standards, what our government allows food producers to do, and they nod and wink with them, just like with the pharmaceutical producers, right? It's all in cahoots. We really need to rewire how this country is working, and we need people to wake up and be vocal. I mean, it's happening, but I don't know if it's happening at a rate fast enough. I wish I could tell you. I know you were probably fishing for a brighter outlook.
No, actually, I'm just seeing if what you see, and if there is one, or if you were put in control and said, okay, here's how we're going to fix this thing, and this is what the action we have to take right now.
Well, we need to teach kids starting at a young age. It needs to be in the curriculum, but that's not what's in the curriculum. It's the opposite. So what I'm hearing from kids taking the ACT or the SAT questions on should GMO stand for genetically modified organics? I mean, you cannot believe what's seeping into curriculum.
I got to tell you that I was at a big conference with about 6,000 gifted high school students who are looking for a career in medicine and medical research. And I'm backstage because it's my friend's event, and I met a Nobel laureate, shaking hands, talking a little bit, who goes out to give his talk. And the central focus of his talk, and he says with great emphasis, that don't let anybody tell you that GMOs are bad or GMOs are bad for humanity, or let them scare you. Those people are wrong. I'm a Nobel laureate, and it's going to solve the hunger crisis throughout the world. And I'm sitting there saying, my God, an otherwise very intelligent human being who obviously...
And he might believe it.
There's no doubt he believed it. But he couldn't have been more wrong.
Well, poverty is what's causing the hunger crisis.
But then,
and
yes,
drought.
yes.
It's a geopolitical issue.
Yeah, and a distribution issue. I mean, we export food out of this country. I mean, but to see that there's all those young minds, and that's what you're saying. It's the opposite. But I believe also that through projects like this with millennials and the way they consume things online, that they're going to hear this message and they're going to share it with their friends, and there could be this sort of uprising, that would initiate some paths to change, which I think are desperately needed right now. So for the people who are watching this, especially the young people, what do you think they can do to be a force for change here?
I think that if millennials watch this, take the time to watch it, that they'll start asking questions and looking on the internet for answers from places that don't belong to the industry, that aren't funded by the industry, and that they start talking about it. And in some ways, even though poor health is common now. So I mean, if they can learn that this wasn't always the way it was, that over half of the pediatric and millennial, or 19, 20-something population wasn't on medication 40 years ago or 30 years ago, that this is new, then maybe it will start them to ask questions. I mean, I hope so. I hope that everybody sees this and asks questions and decides they're not going to take this sitting down, and that they're going to demand better and demand changes. That's all I can hope for. Well,
with your hope, I want to say that I appreciate not only coming and sitting and having this interview, but all the work that you're doing out there in the world, traveling as much as you do. I know that you're speaking out as much as you can possibly do it. So, yeah,
which is a lot. I think.
It's a lot, but I guess it's what you feel like you're here to do.
Yeah,
so,
I guess.
Yeah, so very much appreciate your time and sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you. It was an honor.
Mark, I'd like to start out with you telling me who you are, what your background is, and what institute you work for.
Sure. My name's Mark Castell. I work for the Cornucopia Institute. We're based in Cornucopia, Wisconsin. We're a farm policy research group. We look at farming and food issues and act as organic industry watchdogs.
Organic industry watchdogs. That's interesting. So organic industry watchdogs as opposed to food industry watchdogs, which means there's some issues possibly with what's labeled or certified organic. Is that correct?
Organic agriculture has been around for a long time. In fact, before the 1950s, really all farmers were organic farmers. It wasn't until after World War II that the agrochemicals became widely available. So starting in about 1980, we saw the commercialization of the organic sector, where consumers wanted to opt out of industrial food. They wanted food that was grown in a more environmentally sensitive manner. They were concerned about agrochemicals. They were concerned about drug residues. They were concerned about the humane treatment of animals. And they were willing to compensate farmers more fairly, so that economic justice was really built into that organic price. As the industries become more and more lucrative, it's now over a $30 billion food sector here in the United States. It's gotten very attractive to the multinational agribusinesses that control most of conventional food. So they've gobbled up many of the pioneering organic brands. Our job at Cornucopia is to protect the livelihoods of family-scale organic producers and the authenticity of the food that people are so hungry for.
Very interesting. So that, and I want to make sure I really understand the implication of that. If food is labeled organic, it still is grown organically, even if the parent company might be a very conventional or a company that uses GMOs. But so that still means that the food is grown organically, correct? I mean, is the certification still valid?
Well, that's the theory. And in general, we can trust the organic label. But there are people pushing the limits in both in terms of the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. So the question is, can you produce organic milk on a 10,000 cow factory farm? Can you produce organic eggs in a hen house with 100,000 birds that never go outside?
100,000 birds.
100,000 birds. And forget about the fact that the Organic Foods Production Act mandates that animals get treated in a certain manner. So one of the requirements is that all organic livestock have access to the outdoors, that all organic ruminants, so dairy cows, beef cattle, sheep, have access to pasture. God created these creatures to graze on grass, not sit in front of a feed trough in a CAFO, in a concentrated animal feeding operation. So we have large corporations, large food manufacturers pushing the limits of what truly is organic and lawyering up and hiring lobbyists and playing the same games in Washington that they played with in the conventional food sector. The other factor we look at is imports. So we don't even trust the Chinese for ingredients in our dog and cat food any longer after the melamine scandal. Why would we trust them for the supply of ingredients in our organic food that we're feeding our children?
And is that the case?
We've seen an exponential increase in imports from countries like China, India, Central and South America, the former Eastern Bloc, former Soviet Bloc, Eastern European states. Many of these states, like China, have endemic levels of commercial fraud. So counterfeit name brand goods, intellectual property rights, piracy. There is documentation of fraud within the domestic Chinese media in the organic industry. So why would we trust these people? And the USDA has not been doing a judicious job, as mandated by Congress, to make sure that our organic food is beyond reproach.
Okay, so at the FDA, I'm assuming there's got to be a committee, like an advisory committee, some kind of committee on organic food, what constitutes organic food, in terms of who dictates what's labeled and how things are labeled. There must be a committee.
At the USDA.
Oh, it's at the USDA, not the FDA. Okay, so at the USDA.
Well, the law that charged the USDA to oversee organics is a very good law. Congress passed the Organic Foods Production Act of 1990, and one of its elements was creating an advisory panel, the National Organic Standards Board. It's a broad-based panel of stakeholders. So there are 4 farmers, there's a conservationist, there's an organic certifier, there are organic handlers or manufacturers. So all the different stakeholders. But they did 2 things. One, they loaded it up with a public interest representative and independent farmers so that agribusiness could not dominate this panel, in theory.
In theory?
In theory.
What are you
But
implying?
both during the Bush administration and the current Obama administration, they appointed a number of corporate shills, if you will, into these spots that were reserved by Congress for independent stakeholders in the organic community. The most egregious example of that was during the Bush administration. I wish I was making this up. They appointed an executive of General Mills to sit in the public interest or the consumer spot.
What?
There was such an uproar that, and led by Consumers Union, publisher of Consumer Reports magazine, one of our allies in fighting to maintain the integrity of organics, that they withdrew her name and later appointed her, if she was a food scientist, in the one seat set aside for a scientist. Now, I'm sure Congress did not envision putting just one more corporate executive on the board in the scientist spot. They probably thought they were going to put an academic or someone with an independent voice there. So we have 2 farmers on the board today, as an example, quote, farmers. One's a full-time employee of Organic Valley, which is a farmer-owned cooperative, but it's a billion-dollar business enterprise. The federal law says to qualify in that slot, you need to own or operate an organic farm. She did not own or operate an organic farm when the USDA appointed her. There's another farmer on that board appointed by the Obama administration who works for Driscoll's, I think the world's largest berry producer. They don't grow organic strawberries. And she's not an owner or an operator of an organic farm. But when we did a Freedom of Information request, we found out that just a couple weeks or literally days before she was appointed to this board, Driscoll's became certified to produce the nursery stock, the plants that organic growers would use. Now, whether they're actually producing organic nursery stock or that's just on paper so she could qualify, I can't really testify to. But unfortunately, there were a number of highly experienced and qualified organic farmers who wanted to be on that board, who had been nominated or applied to be on that board, who were passed over so that these corporate representatives could sit in these seats reserved for independent farmers.
So this is the board at the USDA that oversees organic certification.
This is the board that sets the rules. Most federal advisory boards, or FACA boards, are really just that, advisory. Congress actually gave this body statutory authority to do two things. One, advise the secretary on policy issues. So when you're deciding how much a cow has to graze to really qualify for being organic, this board helps determine that. The other is anytime a synthetic is used in organics, or anytime a non-organic agricultural product is used in organic food. So let's say it's not available in an organic form. It has to be reviewed, vetted, and recommended for use by the NOSB, the National Organic Standards Board, before the secretary could put this on the list of approved substances. And so this was the buffer that Congress created.
If we have so many large conventional food producers buying up these organic, smaller or organic businesses, and so now we have General Mills or Kellogg owning, or Clorox owning, organic companies that produce organic produce and organic food or organic other issues, other items. If the large parent companies have their own self-interest now representing the consumer and the scientist on this FACA, this Federal Advisory Committee that actually has statutory rights, it's going to dilute down what's truly organic, right?
It has the potential to do that, and it is. And so when I talk about synthetics and organics, we could probably all agree that organic cupcakes are good. I like organic cupcakes. To make an organic cupcake, you need baking powder. There's no such thing as organic baking powder. So that had to be reviewed, and it checked to see that A, it wasn't deleterious to human health, B, it didn't injure the environment by its use, that it was compatible with organic systems, and finally, that it's essential for use in organics. So in other words, you can't make a cupcake without baking powder. If you could, you can't approve that synthetic. So now we have a board that's looking at all kinds of gimmicky nutraceuticals and food contact chemicals, and they're saying, well, we use those in conventional. We need to be competitive in organic food. We need these approved. And here's where the conspiracy comes in. There's a report on the Cornucopia website entitled The Organic Watergate. This was the wake-up call for us. We started looking at how the materials were reviewed. So not only do we have a board that's been stacked with agribusiness-friendly representatives, the board is not a scientific body. Again, there's only one scientist out of 15 members. It's a lay body of very experienced stakeholders in the organic community. Congress knew that when they set it up, and so they enabled the board to go out and hire technical advice, scientific advisors to do what's called technical reviews of all these materials. Well, when we took a look at who was doing the reviews, They're corporate executives and consultants to the agribusiness industry. So we found a number of materials that has no business being in organics, like carrageenan, a product that can cause severe gastrointestinal inflammation and health problems, even tumor formation. And so one of our jobs at the Cornucopia Institute is to out this duplicity and to put pressure on our regulators, either through the regulatory rulemaking process or, if necessary, in court. The other way that we could create pressure is to empower organic consumers. So if you go on our website, we rate every organic dairy brand, so you can figure out which ones come from that 10,000 cow factory farm and which brands come from family farmers whose cows have names, not numbers. And likewise, you could take a look at which brands of organic soy milk or chocolate milk or sour cream have carrageenan in there and which brands don't. Just by virtue of the fact that there's, for every organic product, there's someone manufacturing without carrageenan, proves that it's not essential,
Right.
which means not legal to use in organics.
Interesting. So I'm curious. I mean, GMOs come up a lot, and I know that's not something that your organization really looks at. However, do you think because this advisory body now is so co-opted, do you think that we'll be finding GMO, genetically modified foods in or things labeled organic? I mean,
Well, yes and no, but I should qualify. We do look at GMOs.
you do.
And
Okay.
we look at we have our own little niche where we look at the economics and the politics. There are lots of groups looking at the health implications, which is very difficult to do because the biotechnology industry, Monsanto and others, actually have in their contracts with farmers a technology agreement that prohibits the farmers from using any of their crop for research, other than agronomic research and yield research. So they can't partner with a physician or a medical researcher to take a look at the impact on human health or the impact on laboratory animals. And so they've really impeded our ability to understand whether GMOs are safe.
Okay, I want to go over what you just said, because if I'm understanding it correctly, it's astounding. I mean, I know there's a paper recently that's just been retracted, or about to be retracted, Cirolini's work, and I think there's a Dr. Swanson who's done some work. And so, are you telling me it's...
I don't think that paper was retracted. I think it was not retracted by its authors.
No,
there was
not-
a lobbying campaign to cause the publication to retract its publication.
Exactly.
It doesn't mean necessarily that that material is invalid.
Exactly. Oh, no, I wasn't implying at all that it was invalid, but thank you for clarifying that.
Sure.
What I'm trying to find out is that, are you telling me that it's illegal? The biotech industry has made it, they've dictated somehow that no one can really do research on their seeds?
Research without their blessing.
Without their blessing. And so who are they giving the blessing to?
Sure, that's the question. And so we have a very limited amount of research happening in terms of research on laboratory animals. Most of these studies last 30, 60, 90 days. There aren't lifetime studies generally being done. And so the real big study that's being currently conducted are on 300 million plus guinea pigs, the American population. We will find out in subsequent generations what impacts these have. The few animal studies and studies on livestock that have been done show some pretty disturbing evidence of problems in terms of organ development, in terms of their impact on our gastrointestinal flora. We now know that the pesticide genes that are inserted in one of the types of Monsanto corn products is finding its way into mothers' bloodstreams and the bloodstreams that are feeding our fetuses. So what impacts that'll have are somewhat unknown, but we feel in the organic community much more comfortable operating under what we call the precautionary principle, which what really governs the regulatory approach in Europe, that first we prove that it's safe, then we introduce it into the human food system. How many products have we introduced, whether it's sodium saccharin or a whole list of other synthetics that we
Aspartame.
find. Aspartame.
Asulfame.
Well, aspartame's still on the market. But
Yeah.
how many materials have we introduced that were perfectly safe,
Oh, right.
that we've subsequently decided, or patent drugs that we subsequently have decided really destroy human health and are highly dangerous, and then remove after a lot of damage is done. So the philosophy of organics is that we don't take those risks, that we depend on truly natural food production, and that if we're going to introduce anything else, that it be very, very carefully studied before we start putting it on the plates of our children.
So the mere fact that the biotech industry has to approve who's going to be allowed to do research on their seeds or on their new products, and yet they, what you hear proponents of the industry say, one, that if you question the safety of GMOs and some of these pesticides, that you are anti-science, or that TED Talks don't even allow you to question the safety of GMOs on their site.
Don't worry, be happy.
Yeah. So, well, we can go into that too. But my question is, their side, the proponents of synthetic food production, say that, well, there's no proof that GMOs aren't safe. There's no proof that these things aren't safe. But yet then they're impeding the research that could show it. So it's...
Jesse Jackson once said, if you want the right answers, you have to ask the right questions. These people don't want to know, and they've made it very hard to find out. There's a lot of pressure in the research arena at, for instance, the land-grant universities, that we have more and more of our research at public institutions being funded by corporate agribusiness and corporate biotechnology interests. And so if you're an independent researcher and you want to study some of these problems or potential problems, you run up against a culture that says, are you sure you want to do that? Because even though you might have access to public funding, you're going to endanger our relationship to our biggest private funders. Do you want a future at this institution? Do you want a future in this profession? And people are intimidated and back off. They've also seen how independent scientists that do research are victimized and intimidated when they do publish or attempt to publish research that does shine a light on some of the problems. That there's a piling on and a ganging up. It's really unprecedented in the scientific community that there would be so much peer pressure to shut up.
Wow.
How many chemicals have been introduced commercially and later withdrawn because we find out they cause cancer or some other deleterious health impact, like sodium saccharin? And that's not an exception. It's common. There's a lot of pressure on scientists at our land-grant public universities to shut up. There's a lot of pressure, even though they might have independent funding, since such a preponderance of our funding for agricultural research is coming from the biotechnology sector, coming from corporate agribusiness, that the message to these independent scientists all too often is, are you sure you really want to do this? Are you sure you want to potentially alienate our largest donors? Do you want a future at this university or in this department? And so the message is clear. Be quiet, get along.
What if they're tenured? Is there still pressure on them to not?
There is pressure because they're all interested in funding, and so they could end up being ostracized. And certainly out in the marketplace of ideas, there's been a piling up, if you will, on scientists that have a relationship with the biotechnology sector, ganging up on those that would dare challenge its propriety.
So we see this in pharma as well,
Absolutely.
in medical
It's the
research.
same players in many cases.
It is the same players, isn't it? Can you tell me just a little bit about that? Because I'm aware of some of the players being the same.
Well, many companies are making patented drugs and agrochemicals like pesticides and genetically engineered seed. And so the interest in the crossover, the same scientists work for different firms. There's this revolving door between these chemical and genetics companies and drug companies and the FDA. And even when they aren't passing through that revolving door, they've many times gone to the same university programs and belong to the same country clubs. So, they're not rubbing shoulders with farmers. They're not rubbing shoulders with consumers who have a real concern about what's in their food. And so there's really almost a mindset in terms of kneeling down and worshiping at the altar of this scientific approach and really discounting what we've learned through many thousands of years of agricultural stewardship. And that's what we're trying to apply in the organic sector.
There was a study that Stanford published, and it had made some claims that there was really no difference between organic produce raised and non-organic. And, my question, I know I've interviewed other people who claim that some of the pesticides, certainly the glyphosate, and I'm not sure about the neonics, but some of the other pesticides or herbicides, chelate out the minerals from the soil. Mm-hmm. And so if that's the case, and we know that, and that's like factual, that's easily enough tested, I would assume, then how can there be no difference between produce raised organically and non-organically? If the soil has more minerals, then you're going to get more minerals in the produce. So there has to be a difference. So I was quite confused over that. I don't know if you know that study, if you want to talk about it.
I am familiar with that study, and I always say follow the money. And right when they released the study, they were very clear by saying, we didn't take any agribusiness money. This was all supported independently by funds we had at Stanford. So we decided to look at where Stanford's independent money was coming from, and it came from corporate agribusiness and biotechnology. That was a big surprise. Some of the researchers that worked on that were researchers that worked with the tobacco industry that also decided that tobacco maybe wasn't so dangerous for your health. So it's really difficult. So there have been other studies that have looked at the nutritional benefit of our food, conducted by Consumers Union, an independent nonprofit, conducted by the USDA, that have found higher nutrient values in organic foods, and demonstrably lower levels of agrochemical contamination. So how did Stanford come up with different numbers? I can't really tell you what their approach was, but I can also tell you that Stanford is the home of the Hoover Institution, which has been an ardent opponent of adopting organic agricultural practices, along with the Hudson Institute and the Heartland Institute and many other very conservative, some might say ultra-conservative think tanks that also get money from corporate interests.
That was the question I was just going to ask you. I mean, it sounds like these institutes are fronts for exactly. Okay, so I know this isn't your field, but I want to ask you your opinion on the health of our nation. So if these small independent organic companies, they start out small and independent and truly organic, right? Mm-hmm. And then they get bought out for lots of money by these larger conglomerates, these food processing companies, Kellogg, General Mills, all these, Nabisco, all these companies. And if they're those companies have control of this advisory committee, then are we going to start seeing GMOs leaking into organics?
Well, the answer to that is yes and no. In general, the answer is no, because part of the bill that Congress passed is as GMOs are explicitly banned in organics.
That's good.
So organic seed can't be GMO. The crops that we feed our animals can't be GMO. The beets that you put on your table can't be GMO. And so for folks who want to assure that GMOs are not part of their diet, organics is the gold standard. The problem is that some of these gimmicky ingredients that they want to add might be GMO. So as an example, a company called Martech Biosciences, it's a part of a Dutch conglomerate called DSM. It's a $12 billion company, the same size as Monsanto. They make an algae oil that they started putting in as a nutritional supplement in infant formula. And even though it's hexane extracted, hexane is a solvent byproduct of gasoline refinement, explicitly banned in organics, they were putting that in. So the Obama administration and the Bush administration were looking the other way. Now, that's illegal, and we're pursuing that. But we found out by looking at the patents when they applied for use in organics that this is manufactured, these strains of algae were created through a process called classic mutagenesis. So that's where they take the genome of a plant and bombard it with either radiation or very harsh chemicals to change its genetic makeup. And by accident, the hope is that they will end up with traits that have more commercial value. In this case, algae that would create a higher omega-3 oil content. And so they're sneaking these into organics. So these products are now in Horizon organic milk. These products are in some of the brands of infant formula, even organic infant formula. And so that's where our job as a watchdog over the National Organic Standard Board is so important, so that they don't compromise. They can't compromise on the crop production being GMO, but are they going to find sub-ingredients that they can do a fancy song and dance with their lawyers and lobbyists and somehow get through?
Question, is the DHA, extra DHA food, eggs, the organic eggs that have DHA added to them, is that from that product?
No. Eggs that are labeled higher omega-3s or DHA are that way because the food that the chickens are eating are a little different. They feed them flaxseed, which is high in omega-3 content. They feed them organic flaxseed. So that's not some gimmicky material that was made in a laboratory. That was something that was grown on an organic farm.
Wonderful. Thank you for that information.
And there was just a study out that proved that organic milk has much higher levels of omega-3 fatty acids than conventional milk. Why is that? Because organic cows are mandated to graze on fresh green grass. And conventional cows are usually in a building, confined their whole lives while they're being milked. And they don't have the sunshine, they don't have that wonderful fresh feed. They have stored, highly concentrated feed, and it produces healthier cows with way healthier milk.
You mean the grass-fed?
Grass-fed.
The grass-fed, because grass has omega-3. Any green-growing plant's going to have high omega-3.
The cow's multiple stomachs are designed to digest grass. God created these creatures to eat grass. We can't eat grass, so they can take these marginal lands that might be erodable, that wouldn't be suitable for raising crops on, they can convert that to really dense nutritional food for us.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you another question, and I know it's not your area of expertise, but you look at food all day, and you know, so you do know something about food and nutritional quality, and you do believe in the precautionary principle, and you know the health of our nation has really declined dramatically in the last 20, 30 years. And especially in the last 15 years, we've seen an exponential rise in autoimmune disease, autism, behavioral problems, especially focus, attention deficit, but the ulcerative colitis and colitis and Crohn's diseases that we're seeing now, especially in children. And I'm wondering, and I know you can't say with any certainty, but is there an opinion that you have on that in terms of its relationship to possibly the introduction of, because that was around the time we introduced GMOs to the food chain, and I'm wondering what your opinion is about this.
Well, I'll tell you two things. One is that from a policy standpoint, we create cheap food in this country. 40 years ago or so, we were spending about 16% of our incomes on food and about 8% on healthcare. Those numbers have almost completely inverted. We have the cheapest food, bar none, in the world, and bar none, the most expensive healthcare. And the outcomes are abysmal in terms of longevity, chronic diseases, infant mortality, premature births. If you compare us to any other industrial country, we are going backwards. And a lot of that has to do with this very highly processed diet filled with synthetics and the way our food is grown. So food and exercise are really the key to life. So if we're sitting in front of TVs and small screens all day, eating Cheetos, eating fast food, what's that going to do to our metabolism? The relationship to GMOs is a little less clear, but there's circumstantial evidence that might cause us to ask some serious questions. One is that we know that some of these products, not only the GMOs, but the widespread use of glyphosate as a herbicide. These crops are resistant. Normally, this herbicide would kill corn or kill soybeans. And so we've ramped up the use of these toxic chemicals. It's changed the microflora in the soil, and it's changed the microflora in our digestive tracts. And we're just beginning to learn more and more about how our bodies are really made up of billions of microbes and little bacteria, lots of little critters that are not dangerous. They are actually adding to our health and our nutritional well-being. And so whether it's broad spectrum antibiotic use or residues of antibiotics in our food or synthetic dyes, synthetic preservatives, agrochemical residues, all these things have an impact on our well-being. We're also learning that the way we've measured the impacts of agrochemicals in our diets on our health is a bit outdated. That yes, we want to look at what levels are toxic, and we want to look at the carcinogenic properties of these chemicals. But we're learning more and more that in their most minute doses, many of these synthetic compounds act as endocrine mimickers or endocrine disruptors. And so if they're present at very critical junctures of development in utero or in very young children's diets, in mother's milk, in infant formula, or in food and during developmental periods, especially in the development of sexual organs. They're very sensitive to these chemical triggers, these hormonal triggers, and some of these can cause lifetime catastrophic impacts.
Well, if they're acting as endocrine mimickers, then they could theoretically increase breast cancer. Any hormone-related cancer would increase from, if something was sitting on the estrogen or unbinding estrogen,
Sure.
If it's an endocrine mimicker, it certainly could affect estrogen levels and estrogen metabolism. So I would imagine that could be maybe one of the reasons that we're seeing such a large increase in breast cancer rates these days as well.
And not just breast cancer, but I would testify that probably the human mammary gland is one of the most sensitive organs in our species to chemical compounds that have a tendency to bind and accumulate in fatty tissue. So just as we know the amphibians that we share this planet with are the coal mine canaries in the rural environment, we're seeing problems with the other non-human species that we share the earth with. We should be listening to them and their impacts. Their lifespans are shorter, their metabolism is different. These warning signals are being ignored.
Right, and the bioaccumulation is going to take a shorter time period. You're going to see it moving through generations. That's a good point, and that brings me to, and maybe I'm wrong, but wasn't one of the reasons that PCBs were removed from the market was because we were seeing amphibians with really weird genetic defects?
Well, that was one of the problems, and the bioaccumulation, and the fact that these are extremely persistent chemicals. We've soiled our own bed. There are PCBs and dioxins in the mother's milk and sperm of mammals in Antarctica. We've never spread them up there. So again, we're dialing back to the precautionary principle. We should know what we're doing before we spread millions of pounds worth of toxic chemicals in our environment. You remember that most of these compounds are biocides. They're designed to kill life. So why are we so surprised when they get into our bloodstream that they end up killing us?
It's a really good point, and you're not the first person to bring that exact point up. That it is something that scares me, and I'm scared for the young generation right now, and the people that are in grade school right now, when they're having children, what are we going to see? One of the things I want to ask you is...
Sure, because let me just interject for a second. The whole question about GMOs, they have been in our food system for such a minute blip in terms of human evolution, not even a full generation. So we really don't know what long-term impacts we're going to see.
And thank you for bringing that up, because I have to ask you another question. I've heard proponents of the industry also claim that GMOs have been around for hundreds of years, and often nectarines are used as the example, and they'll talk about, that we've been modifying our food and hybridizing our food, and there's no difference between that and a genetically modified organism. And I'm wondering if you want to just take us through that briefly.
Yeah, that's a specious argument, because we have been manipulating plants for many generations, but we don't insert genes from other species into those plant cultivars. So we do cross plants that are related to each other. We don't put fish genes into tomatoes. We don't use viruses as a transporting vector. We don't use antibiotic-resistant bacteria in the process. And part of the problem is the particular genes that they insert, but they rearrange the genome and they create unintended consequences in terms of the genetic makeup of some of these plants. So we really even don't know. So the impacts in totality on the genetic makeup of some of these food items that we're eating are unknown. But plant breeding has been around for as long as we've been an agricultural species.
So let me ask you about feeding the world, because this is something that we all hear again, that if we question the safety of GMOs and don't want, and if we want GMOs labeled even, then that makes somebody mean and insensitive, and they don't care about poor, starving children. I mean, I've heard serious people say that. Are we feeding more people with genetically modified organisms? Does it increase our yield? Are we able to feed starving? Have we alleviated starvation around the planet with our genetically modified food?
We haven't done that yet, have we? I don't know of any plant that's been genetically modified that has increased yield and had a benefit in terms of producing more food. Most of the yield increases we've had during the period of time that GMOs have been in the marketplace happens in the traditional plant breeding that are being done in conjunction with the genetic modification. So it's the traditional, not the GMO manipulation of the genetics, that's causing yields to increase. But quite frankly, we can't feed as many people as they're forecasting. And instead of scientists trying to figure out how to manipulate agricultural production, we should start to think about how to more smartly manage population on this planet, because there is going to be a carrying capacity, a finite carrying capacity. It might not be food. It might not be peak oil. It might be peak water. We don't know what factor will cause a population collapse. But at some juncture, we will have that population collapse in our species and many other species that can't be replicated. And what impacts that will have on future generations is a grand experiment that we're willing to risk right now.
Okay, so my final question to you is, if, we haven't tested these foods, we haven't tested the GMO movement, and, as you said, everything was raised organically till 1935?
I say 1950, and we were using synthetic fertilizers before that, but most of the pesticides and insecticides and synthetic fungicides, none of them were around.
None of them were around. Okay, so it's fairly new. Our health has clearly declined. I mean, it's hard to not admit that, right? I mean, I think everybody would admit that the health of the average North American has really declined, especially citizens of the United States. I mean, we have a lousy outcome in terms of our health care and in terms of infant mortality, all the things that you talked about, and certainly all our diseases are on the rise. Obesity, childhood diabetes is, type 2, not even type 1, but even though type 1's on the rise, but type 2.
There's also a real increase in a lot of behavioral problems
Absolutely.
In children and adults, and some of these can be tied to synthetic additives in our food, the way our food is processed. And so it's not just physical maladies that we're dealing with. And really we have kind of a synergy here between the chemical industry and the pharmaceutical industry, because we have this medical industrial complex that we're living a lot longer than we did 70 years ago. But now how are we doing that? And what is our quality of life? And what are the impacts on how well we're living?
Why is the USDA, why is the FDA And even in some cases, the EPA, right? In some cases, these foods are, the jurisdiction is the EPA.
Well, the chemicals are.
Well, I know just from the genetically modified potato, which is not in the market now, but when it was, Michael Pollan's book, he talked about how he called, the FDA and asked about the safety, and they said it's under the jurisdiction of the EPA.
Well, that's because the food is actually licensed as a pesticide.
Right, so that's what I'm saying. But why is it that our government...
Let's eat pesticides. Yeah.
Why is it that our government is turning a blind eye to all of this kind of, I call it shenanigans going on, where, okay, no longer, this food's not going to be under our jurisdiction because now we're going to say it's a pesticide, so we've washed our hands of it. And then the EPA says, well, we've had this pesticide, on the market for years, so we don't really care if it's in a potato or corn or whatever, because, we've had it, so we'll let it go on the market. And we see the health failing, and we see our health care costs skyrocketing.
Don't worry about those levels of contamination because they're under the safety threshold that the government regulators have set. And when they're not, we'll just change the level of concern. So they just doubled the level of residues that are legally acceptable from glyphosate in our food, the most widely used herbicide in the United States.
Mark, what do you see as the solution to this? I mean, you're involved with policy, farming policy, food policy. What's the plan? What's the game plan? How are we going to correct this?
Well, my mantra is don't panic, go organic.
That's good.
So now it's our job and so now I ask the operative question, who owns the organic label? We do. Farmers and consumers and people who are interested in better food. So we really have to work together. Unfortunately, farmers have no clout. There's less than 2% of our nation still involved in production agriculture. It used to be to win federal office, you had to be concerned with the farm vote or statewide office in many states. And now when the presidential candidates get done kissing the rear end of the ethanol lobbyists in Iowa every 4 years, you'll never hear about food and farming again. So we have a secret weapon at the Cornucopia Institute, and we have one in the organic community, and that's the organic consumer. So there are millions of consumers who passionately give a damn about the pedigree of their food. And they want authenticity. They want to support the true heroes in this business, the farmers and their business partners that provide wonderful, nutritious, and safe food for our families. And they're willing to stand up. So we need to work together. That's why we encourage people to visit the Cornucopia Institute website and not just blindly go to the store. We've published scorecards that empower consumers to vote in the marketplace for rewarding those farmers that are really walking the talk and those corporate brands that they can really believe in, and sending a really important message to the agribusiness executives that are exploiting the goodwill of the organic consumers that we're not going to give you our precious money if you're not going to respect our values.
That's a great answer.
It's a shame we have to do this because the organic seal should be the Cliff Notes version of doing your food research. And we want to get back to that point. In the meantime, astute organic consumers have to educate themselves a little bit because the good news is there's wonderful organic food out there. You just need to decode the different brands in the marketplace to make sure you're providing your family with the very best.
Thank you so much. It was really informative. So another question I have for you that you may or may not be able to answer is an opinion on, food isn't the only thing that's genetically engineered and modified. We have viruses that are, and they're used in vaccinations. And we've certainly seen very similar modus operandi in terms of the industry and how it studies the safety of vaccinations. And I don't even think that most people are aware that these viruses are genetically engineered. And so I don't know if you have an opinion. Again, it's not your field of expertise, but do you ever see any crossover in terms of the MO of the business? And do you have an opinion on also all the vaccines? Like when you and I were little, we each got probably 6 vaccinations. But by age
now they
one,
have hundreds.
Yeah, and by age 1, babies have had 24 vaccinations, and by age 18, in some states, it's 53, and growing. And so I'm curious what your opinion is in terms of how that's impacting our health.
Right. You're right. I'm not qualified to answer that question. The only thing I'll tell you is there is a difference when we get involved in crop production with GMOs. We're releasing these novel organisms that have never existed on Earth before into the environment. We can't call them back if there's a problem. If we release genetically engineered salmon and they escape from their farms, which they're going to do, and breed with our wild stock. You know, does anybody remember the Irish potato famine?
Yes.
You know, you get very narrow ranges of genetics and then you have diseases wipe them out. We could end up with no wild salmon. And so the difference between that and medical applications of GMO is at least we're not on a wholesale basis releasing those. So is the problem vaccinations in themselves? Is the problem some of the ancillary chemicals that are used to preserve those? Or is the problem the GMOs themselves? I don't know, but are there any scientists looking at this?
There are, but to answer your question, that actually it does cause antigenic shift and antigenic drift when you vaccinate. So if you're vaccinating against a certain strain of a virus, you might see that decline, but then another strain that has been dormant that we've never seen, that's more potent or more lethal, now
it's going to evolve.
It's going to evolve. And so instead of Bordetella pertussis, we see parapertussis. You know, so there is that antigenic shifting with vaccinations.
The other question with all patent drugs is who's looking at the interaction between these different treatment modalities. And we're evolving into a species that lives in a chemical soup, a myriad of chemicals that are present in our food, either intentionally as synthetic ingredients or unintentionally as drug and agrochemical residues in our food. And then we combine those with the number of prescription drugs and off-the-counter drugs that people are taking. And how many people are taking 6, 10, 12 different drugs in addition to these other chemicals? We test them individually. We never test this chemical cocktail that now exists in our bloodstreams.
And in our waters.
And in our water, right, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. It's been incredibly informative, and you're doing amazing work at the Institute. And I want to thank you personally for doing what you do.
Well, thanks for your kind words, and good luck on your project.
Thank you.
Okay, so up here, you can see we've got a hive in here, a very vigorous hive that's in the wall of my house.
Oh, yeah.
It's been there forever. It's been there for over 10 years. That hive is really bustling. We are a bee sanctuary because this is a chemical-free zone. We have no neonicotinoid type of chemicals.
Right.
The tobacco concentrates, the nicotine concentrates, can damage bees. I grow tobacco here.
Right.
A tobacco plant can catch a bee and dissolve it right on its leaf because tobacco is an insect-eating plant.
Wow.
And that just was now finally put into botany books about 2 years ago. They finally stated that. But if you grow tobacco, you know that. You see it because it just absorbs insects right through it. And when you're concentrating these tobacco alkaloids like they do in these neonicotinoid type of pesticides, then you can actually very seriously damage the bee population, and then I think that's one of the major contributors amongst the other chemicals that are being sprayed.
I'd say so that creates a colony, what they call colony collapse, where we're losing bee colonies over this type of farming.
Yeah, what's happening is you're weakening the bee, then they become more susceptible to the varroa mite, the beetle, and the other predators that are in the hive. And on some of the islands, like here, we have a very easy situation, but on the Big Island, there are so many predators. If those bees are weakened at all, the colony collapses.
Wow.
And that's what's also happening on the mainland.
Wow.
But we keep them happy and we keep them healthy and we keep them in the walls of the house right here. Now, what's interesting is if I stand here for a while, eventually one of them will come and one of the guard bees will go, zzz, will be hanging out right here, and then it will hit me. It'll just crash
like
into
a
you.
warning?
Yeah, warning you. It'd be like, bam, like punch you. It'd be like,
Most
whoa,
people
that
say,
bee
like,
just
I got bee infestation. They
flew
want
and
to
hit me.
eradicate them. But you're saying, hey, just let them live here. I can live with them in the house. It's
absolutely.
not a big deal.
Yeah, that's important too, is that this whole thing of man against nature, what was that story? What a nightmare that's been.
No kidding.
Just live in harmony with nature. We want the bees in our wall. They're putting comb in that wall. They're making it into a fractal pattern. I mean, houses are straight lines. It's not really natural. So when an animal like a bee comes in and gives that fractal pattern and adds the magic of the honey in the wall,
Right.
we want that.
That's awesome.
So that's a great vigorous hive, and it's pollinating all these fruit trees over here. So let's go check out what we got. This right here is a favorite cacao tree. Originally, this variety came from Maui, and it's a tremendous producer. These are the young cacao pods. This is eventually going to produce cacao beans or chocolate beans that are going to develop inside here. There's about 30 to 40 cacao beans will develop in here. That gives you about 3 or 4 chocolate bars, dark chocolate bars.
Nice.
Now, if you're going to thin it out, then you can make more.
Right.
But these are dark chocolate bars. And what you see in here, what I like to do, let's see how it's doing. I've got a little orchid in there. Let's see how that orchid is doing. You can see its roots. See these little roots coming down there?
Yeah.
So I like to put orchids in my trees. And it's hanging out the backside now. Here, it's over here. Well, I'll show you a better example. You can see it's just hanging on that side.
Yeah.
So it'll flower and send flowers, orchid flowers out. So we'll either in our cacao trees put orchids, vanilla, or both.
Nice.
Now this tree right here, this is one of my favorite cacao trees. That's why I put it right next to the house. I brought this seed originally from Costa Rica. It is an absolutely gorgeous, original, Criollo, dainty cacao. And what that means to me is it gives you a wonderful, light, fluffy flavor. It's just, let me just show you the pods. Let's just have a look. The pods here, they've got a nipple on them that's just amazing.
Oh, wow.
You can see it right here.
Yeah.
See this guy right there?
Oh, yeah.
And you can see it. They get this little tiny thing, like a little pattern. Now this tree, you'll see the vanilla on it. This is the vanilla right here.
Oh, yeah.
See the vanilla?
Yeah.
This vanilla, when this tree sprouted, I put it in the ground right here, which is not what I normally do. If it's a really good variety, I'll do that. But normally I'll let them get a little bigger in the nursery, and then I put a vanilla in with it right at the beginning. So this vanilla and cacao have been living together from the time they were planted.
Wow. That's awesome.
And they're intertwined with each other. And what an amazing thing to get the vanilla beans from a cacao they've lived together. That's like Romeo and Juliet for real. Okay, let me show you something else over here. This is one of my favorite cacaos. This is a Honduras cacao. Okay, so this is a Tahitian vanilla, which doesn't do really well around here. You can see the Tahitian vanilla is right here. It's just a small piece. See that piece right there? And it's just getting going. It's got a little rootlet going.
Yep.
But we do also have this orchid in there, which has a beautiful flower.
Yeah.
And so we do that together. And then at the same time, you can see right over here, boom, there's our cacao pods. And these are ready.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, those are ready. So we're going to probably do those. And the way you can tell is you just scratch it. If you scratch it and it's just yellow underneath, see, I'm scratching, you can't even see a difference in color.
Yep.
That means it's ready. If I scratch it and it's green under there, it's not ripe yet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but this is Honduras Mountain Criollo variety. So it's like that other one over there, but a little bit more jungly.
Yeah.
Like this thing is a survivor. This comes from the mountains of Honduras, where, you know, the Congrejal River. It goes from 0 to 8,000 meters or whatever, 0 to 8,000 feet, sorry, in like, you know, right out of the ocean.
Yeah,
Yeah,
nice.
neat spot. Okay, let's keep going this way.
You know, it's like you're a painter, and these are your palette is the trees and the things you're blending together. It's amazing.
It's an original art form, right?
Yeah.
Farming is an original art form.
This is art.
This is an orchid here sitting in this guy. And because these aren't really great producers, these two trees, we decided to graft them with our really good varieties just for fun, because it's close to the house. And so we got a nice graft happening here. You can see this thing is developing nicely. And there's another one down there. And then over on this side, you can see the development of these grafts right there. So eventually what will happen is we'll cut this tree back and let the grafts come in stronger. And then we'll have 3 different varieties of cacao on one tree.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. That's just, you know, that's fun, experimental stuff that we like to do. We love Osiris. This is our cat. And this cat is a predator.
Are you Egyptian?
Cats get rats, as we like to say. So dogs for hogs and cats for rats in Hawaii. And this guy right here can get birds, big rats, huge ones. The Polynesian rat is amazing because they eat like noni and coconut. Oh, wow. So they actually are cute, but they are a problem. You know, they get in your house, they dig into stuff, they get to your food. So we need a cat to get them, and that's our cat.
Beautiful.
Okay, so I'm going to take you up to the Old Hawaiian Road here on the landing. This is a very neat spot, very unusual in Hawaii to have a place like this that has the old road in it. And I've learned a lot from living next to this road about the way the Hawaiians lived here and about how they understood nature. And I'm going to show you, it's just fascinating. You can use the stairs, a little easier to grip. The reason why I picked this lot is because I've been looking in Hawaii for years, like 10 years, and I was staying with a friend of mine on this street, and I had a dream one day, like a daydream, where I woke up and I was like, oh, this is it. This is the street. Really? So I called my friend up. I said, get me a listing of every place on the street. First one came up was this place.
Wow. Nice.
We came over here. I walked up at the bottom of the house. I looked around, and it was a scene from a dream, a repeating dream that I had my whole life.
Wow.
And I knew, that's it. This is it. The real estate agent was like, no, we've got to look at other places. And I'm like, no, we don't. This is it. It's clear.
Yep.
And so that was it. It was just happened like that.
You know.
I didn't even know that this place was a wild noni grove.
Wow.
This originally, when the Hawaiians were here, this is the old Hawaiian road that we're standing on right now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And what it is it consists of small rocks like this. See that rock right there?
Yep.
They dug a trench into the ground, probably 2 meters, but it might even be deeper. I've dug 4 feet into it.
Yeah.
So it's still this kind of rock, and they just put little rocks smaller than my fist, piled up, piled up, piled up, piled up, piled up. And eventually you have a road and trees won't grow on it because they can't get into it.
Right.
Trees do not like a road that is just basically filled with rocks and has all those hollow, empty spaces in it. And it's just easy to maintain because of that. And they'd figured that out, whatever, 1,000 years ago.
Right.
So this is the old Hawaiian road that separates that Aupua'a, which is that drainage over there. If we go up to the fence, that field and all the way down is another district. And then this starts a new district right here. And they just put the road just underneath so you can't see it, you know, from that Aupua'a right there.
How old do you think this road is?
It's hundreds of years old.
Wow.
It might even be 1,000 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, and you can see it's still here.
Yeah, I mean, clearly.
Yeah, it's impressive in that regard, and very difficult to plant anything into it because any tree, once it gets deep enough, like even these tulips right here, this African tulip, they put their roots out sideways.
Yeah.
They can't get into it because that hollow space down deep in the earth is something that trees do not like.
Right. Wow.
Okay, so you can see we got cacaos here. Look at our avocados here. Look at this one. Last year it produced its first fruit, and this year it's coming with everything.
Some of these are huge.
Great variety, and just a wonderful avocado right here. And you can see that avocados here, they perform to their genetic capacity. This is the ideal environment for an avocado and ideal soil conditions.
Nice.
It's great. Okay, I'm going to show you up here to the fence, and we'll show you what's behind. This is a ranch behind us, and with a sacred site on it.
Oh, really?
And I always wanted to be abutted up against a wild environment so I could go all the way into the wilderness without any road in the way. We just did this yesterday. You can see we've got this trellis over here where we've got guava. This is guava.
Oh, nice.
Right here. And then we've also got some passion fruit will come over here too. We had to cut it back because it gets a little aggressive. But this one right here, this little archway that we just did yesterday, is for the sacha inchi nut.
I never heard of that.
That's a amazing omega-3 fatty acid source from Peru. Yeah, and it's widely eaten there. Sacha inchi.
Inchi.
Yeah. Inchi, like an inch with an I at the end.
Right, nice.
Okay, these are sourshops. We grow a lot of sourshops here. They do really well here. It's basically the national fruit of the Caribbean, very well grown in Jamaica. You can see that's the young fruit.
Yeah.
And this is one of our hales up here. So this tree right here, let me show you this. I'm an avocado connoisseur.
Yeah.
I've been growing avocados since I was 7. And this is a very unusual phenomenon, so I gave it a good spot up here. This avocado tree, when it broke out of the seed, you know, when the seed splits and the avocado comes out, came out as a 3.
Oh, wow.
That's like 1 in 10,000.
Really?
Yep.
No kidding.
And so I gave it a spot here, and I was like, okay, boom, this is going to be your spot where you can grow and become what you're supposed to be.
Wow.
And this thing's just about to reach maturity. It might have a few avocados on it this year. Next year, it'll be mega amounts.
Wow.
So that's just what happens the first year, but then next year, it's going to be 100. After that, it'll be 300 right here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So this is a very interesting variety, and because it was so special when it sprouted, I gave it the spot. That's the 3 right there, yeah. Yep, unusual. This is cassava, which is one of the most widely eaten foods in the world. It's in the top 15 foods eaten in the world. It's the root of this is the jungle potato. It's a jungle potato. Widely eaten throughout the Amazon. It's the main Amazonian source of carbohydrates. And we've heard about it maybe as tapioca root or manioc root.
Right.
Great consistency, great product, great for farming because no creature eats it. Only humans eat it. Over here is our fire pit. Let's have a look at this.
Oh, yeah.
So this is where we do like any kind of sacred fire, any kind of sacred ceremony happens here. This is ayahuasca. Right there, this vine.
That vine?
Yeah, this vine right here.
Wow.
It's just going up into this tree. This thing's about 8 years old, this guy, maybe 9.
Amazing.
Yeah. You know, there's this thing about growing the food
Uh-huh.
and how it affects you nutritionally.
Right.
That story has never been told correctly. When you grow the food, you get something, and you get something nutritionally from it, just from growing it.
Right.
There's definitely an interaction there. Same with like ayahuasca.
Yeah.
Just from growing it, you get something from it. So I don't need to drink it.
Yeah.
I can just be with it,
Right.
and I get that. You know what I mean? So it's not like It's not like, yeah, just having it is enough.
It's like
It's energetic.
It's like when my Italian mother cooks. It's got a special something.
Very important nutrient
Charcoal.
for the soil right there, biochar or charcoal. You talk about remediating a toxic pesticide-laden environment right there in ourselves and in the earth. Charcoal. Charcoal is one of the most important. That was pretty good. Charcoal is one of the most antitoxic substances there is, maybe the most antitoxic thing there is.
Right.
And so we take this, whenever I'm putting a new tree in, I'll take some bits of charcoal, that goes in the bottom. Then I put a half of a coconut in there with the bowl up.
Right.
So put that in there, then I put the tree in that bowl
Right.
with the soil, then put the soil in on top.
Nice.
And then that way we get a catchment for water, we get the sponge of the coconut husk itself, and then we have the charcoal all there.
Awesome. Wow.
Okay, so let's see if we can peek up here and check this out. This is a yopo tree from Ecuador. Look at this guy. Hi.
Oh yeah.
This is the most gorgeous plant. See how small the leaf is?
Oh yeah.
So the leaf to size of tree ratio is the best in the world. It has the smallest leaf, the biggest size tree. Eventually this will become a huge tree like that. Massive.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The history of this plant, the shamanic history of this plant, is one of the most interesting in all of botany to me. So almost all the literature on this plant is in the Spanish language.
Really?
Yep, very little of it is in the English language, or even English-speaking people don't really know much about it at all. Okay, so here's another yopo tree. This guy, the seed of this is used shamanically and has been for 7,000 years.
Wow.
Yeah, this tree has a very interesting connection with the human race, and I just love the beauty of it. I'm absolutely in love with it. That's the kapok tree, the Mayan world tree. So we gave that the position at the top of the whole property. That thing will eventually get up and become a massive tree, this thing right here.
Really?
And you can see how it has chlorophyll in the bark.
Oh, yeah.
That allows it to survive even in desert environments, so it can grow all the way from the desert all the way into the tropics. The seed of this has a parachute kind of thing like dandelion has, and was probably the inspiration for the floating seeds in Avatar.
Oh wow.
It's the kapok tree, and if you know about, you're a chiropractor, you
Yes.
got to know about pillows, right?
Yes, of course.
The kapok pillow. Look up that one.
I will,
Yeah,
I
kapok.
will.
K-A-P-O-K.
Kapok.
Kapok pillow, and they use the feather, the parachute of this seed, to stuff pillows with.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's the best
Yeah.
ever.
All right.
Anyway, but this is more sacred to the Mayan people than cacao is. This is
Really?
the tree that's even higher. Yeah,
No
it's the
kidding.
tree of souls, so that's why we put it right here at the top. We grew this from a seed. We sprouted this thing here. Okay, so keep going.
Yeah.
This is Tulsi, or holy basil. This is the great Ayurvedic adaptogen. This is #1 herb in Ayurvedic medicine.
Is it
so,
really?
Or you
I
leave
take
it out.
that. So
You take Tulsi, yeah. So it's an adaptogen. So it helps you to adapt to all environmental changes, traveling. If you're in a situation where you're like, I need my immune system to go up, it can help you go up. If you need your immune system to come down, it's adaptogen.
Right.
So it's a dual directional adaptogen, brings
Nice.
your immune system down. Anti-autoimmune is what that means.
Wow. Wow.
Look, see, there's the bees.
Oh yeah.
The bees look,
are fun.
our honey has so much Tulsi in it, it's not even funny.
that is.
Beautiful.
Look at this soursop here. This is graviola. You probably heard of this. It's anti-cancer.
Yeah.
And the cancer-fighting element is present in the fruit, but it's also very prevalent in the young sprouted leaves right here, like this size. So here, that one right there,
Yep. Wow.
and you can taste it. You're like, okay. got it. So if this thing ferments on you,
Yeah.
then all fruits come with their natural fermenting bacteria or yeasts on them.
Right.
This one has a fermenting yeast
Yeah.
that gets a strong alcohol quick.
Wow.
So this, when it's fermented with coconut water,
Uh-huh.
sometimes you just sip on that and you're just like, wow, that is full on. Because the bacteria or yeast have parsed up the medical compounds
Right.
and made it more available.
Right.
So it drives it in. So you
Nice.
just sip on it. You're like, whoa, okay, let me just sit with that one. So that's really cool like that. It's a very versatile fruit. Soursop or graviola or guanabana.
Guanabana.
Yeah, it's an Annona family.
Yeah. Nice.
Okay, so let's keep going this way. Show you guys another little section of the farm here. This is egg fruit or lucuma. Noni right there. This is still young. It hasn't fruited yet, but it's coming. Here's a really healthy, happy grouping of avocados. These guys right here. So they're just about, this guy a little behind, but this guy, probably next year we'll get a fruit off of it. Maybe the year after. This is the thing to watch out for. The Java plum, this guy right here, they can come down from high up above. So you got to
Wow.
keep these things out of the way. This is a typical type of pioneer planting. Avocado above, loaded. You can see how loaded those avocados are.
Oh, yeah.
Loaded. And then cacao below.
What do you mean by pioneer planting?
This was basically a dried out, overrun with weed trees. No, look at that.
Oh, wow.
Boom. Overrun with weed trees, unusable eating environment. So what we did is we came in here, we took the big trees and we burned them. And then took all that biochar and put it underneath the avocados. And then once the avocados get up there and they put the shade up, then the cacaos go in underneath.
Okay.
Otherwise the cacaos wouldn't make it here because there's just too much wind and too much debris. There wasn't enough space. And so we have to watch out. You can see how productive these avocados are. So every time I'm up here, I have to kind of go through. There's a sprouted avocado.
Oh, wow.
Another sprouted avocado here.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right, so the one I was telling you about up there had a 3 come out of here
Ah.
instead of just a 1.
Oh, nice.
And then what we have to do to kill that is just crack it like that, and then you feed it to the plant. That's called the chop and drop. So you come in, you just break it like that, and you feed it to the tree. Oh, this one, there's an edible. Wants a bite.
Notch that down.
Yeah, get that thing down. And then I go through and I'll make sure that these avocados are not taking over my cacaos. So I'll feed them to them instead, like that. Weeding is it's a discipline. It's something that you just do automatically. You don't think about, oh, I'm going to go weed. It's just an automatic reaction. That's how we think about it. And then we use that as food. That's a chop and drop, or
Nice.
using the forest to feed your plants. Anyway, this whole forest is loaded with all these goodies. Okay, let's put that over there. Okay, there's a path down here. We put a coconut in right there
Oh, yeah.
a few years ago. Getting that thing going. And what else we got in here? There's an aki fruit right there. All the sour sops are in here. This whole stretch right there.
Cool.
Okay, right here, so you can see we're on solar,
Oh, yeah.
and you can see the view we got.
Gorgeous.
Gorgeous, all the North Shore right there. Right here, this is a pau d'arco tree. Right there, this is a great antifungal, so the bark of that's used. You can see the fruits right there.
Yep.
Morinda citrifolia. In my opinion, of all tropical trees, this is the most medicinal. The bark is medicinal. The leaves are medicinal. The root is crazy medicinal. The fruit is medicinal. The flower is medicinal.
Wow.
Like if we just get up here, get one of these flowers, look at that. See these? And you can eat those. Here, you try one. Try one. The bees love it. Then you get the fruit. When the fruit ripens like that, you can eat it. It's very intense.
Yeah.
We like to blend them and pulp them and then strain out the seed particles.
Yep,
Then you
yep.
get the omega-3 from the seed.
Right.
You get the sulfur from the seed. Within 2 weeks, you can see your fingers and nails and everything. Your skin shining, your nails are glowing. It's
Wow.
just crazy. Hard nails. So it has a very powerful effect on beauty. And it's interesting because its signature is it stinks.
Yeah.
Right? It smells like a rotten shoe
yeah.
or something,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Rotten cheese.
Yeah, like rotten cheese, blue cheese dressing, basically.
Yeah.
And so it has this thing of like, you have to pay to play.
Yeah.
And nature does that a lot. Wipe yourself off. You can just use a papaya. It's friendly.
It's got one on it. Ready to go.
Oh, really?
Oh.
Wild papayas. That's great. All right, so that's why we always have a bag for collecting food
Nice.
as we go. Anyway, let's talk about the noni here real quick. Again, you can see right here. Let's get a fruit down. I want to show you guys a really good one. This one right here. Let's look at this. There's the fruit. Whoa. That's perfectly ripe for picking. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick that. Now I can throw that into a jar. I do that quite a bit where I have a big jar where all the nonis melt down and turn into a vinegar.
Right.
That's sold as noni juice.
Right.
It's not a noni juice. It's a noni vinegar is what it is.
Uh-huh.
So that's a really good way to do this product because it's toned down a little bit. If you do noni pulp every day,
Yeah.
you're going to be jacked up out of your mind. Like you'll go be 2 weeks, you'll be like, You feel like Superman, actually.
Really?
But it's a little bit too much yang.
Yeah,
It's too powerful. But the noni juice is a good way to do it every day as a tonic, slight amount. And that's our answer to apple cider vinegar in the tropics.
Wow.
Instead of apple cider vinegar, we do noni juice or noni vinegar.
Nice. Beautiful, thank you.
Okay, we've got to see some vanilla real quick. This is Tahitian vanilla. You can see they're kind of smaller.
The beans, yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay.
Beautiful.
You can see right there, look at that.
Oh, yeah.
Boom. You ever
Nice.
seen vanillas like that? Look at
No.
the size of that fat.
Crazy.
Vanilla pompona right there. So the vanilla and the cacao live together.
Yeah,
and that's one of the things we pioneered in permaculture. I was thinking, God, where am I going to plant vanilla?
Yeah.
It's got to be a natural way. And I thought, well, let's put it in the cacao. We've grown cacao and vanilla together for 10 years, and it's just been an absolutely magical experience. There's more vanilla right there. Look at that.
Yeah.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
When you have, like, all our food products here on a table, and it's a dipping contest where you take the cacao bean and you dip into the vanilla, then into the honey, and then into the, coconut.
Wow.
It goes cuckoo.
I mean, there's got to be some synergistic effect with them coexisting, and growing together.
They say that the cacao picks up the flavors of the things it grows with.
Yeah.
And I have definitely had people tell me that they tasted vanilla and noni in our cacao when there is no vanilla and noni in that cacao. So I get this all the time. People suddenly snap out of it and they become aware, like, oh my God, we've been eating genetically modified food. We've been eating sprayed food. We want to go organic. We want to go natural. What do? My husband has the beginning of Parkinson's disease. Mm-hmm. First recommendation is this food right here, which is mucuna, the mucuna bean. Now, we are mucuna growers. There's the mucuna bean right there. Mucuna is the #1 anti-Parkinson's food ever found.
Really?
And it works to correct the shikimate pathway.
Ah.
So when there's been a disturbance due to glyphosate in the shikimate pathway, there is a food that corrects it. It's called mucuna. It's a pioneer. It's this plant right here. It's the one with all these wonderful trios of leaves, this one. And it is the Jack and the Beanstalk plant, in my opinion. You can see it's all in there.
Yep.
Okay, now you're thinking, oh my God, our cacao trees are getting overwhelmed by this. No, because it'll do that for 6 months. Then it completely dies back, and all of that debris, that nitrogen, goes back into the soil, and the cacao goes, oh yeah, this is good. So it works synergistically with the plants, the fruit trees, because it's driving that nitrogen, it's creating nitrogen debris, plus it's producing for us one of the most powerful medicinal substances called mucuna. And mucuna and cacao have been eaten together longer than vanilla and cacao have been eaten together in Central America and where these plants are from. Now, one thing I also want to say about this is mucuna is the plant and the food that you need if you've had a long life of taking drugs and stimulants. So especially when people are coming off of like drug addiction, heroin addicts, that kind of stuff, we get them onto the mucuna powder.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And we say mucuna matata means no worries. But it's with an M.
David, this has been a spectacular tour. I've never been on a property that's got so much dynamic to it, and it's beautiful.
Thank
From the views to the ocean.
Thank you.
All the way up to the sacred grounds on the top and everything in between. Anyway, thank you for inviting us into your world, and what a special world it is.
Really appreciate what you're doing, and good luck with the GMO project.
Thanks, man.
Let's get the word out there, and
Yeah.
let's help people get happy again.
Yeah, we're going to do that.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Wasn't that walk with David Wolf a lot of fun? I really hope you enjoyed that episode. And tomorrow is a big day. We have 2 powerful interviews that we made a couple of trips for in our production, which was quite a magic carpet ride, I have to tell you, going to all these places. But we go to Florida and we interview Sayer G. Now, Sayer G and his website, GreenMed Info, let me tell you, they're one of the most powerful activists on the anti-GMO issue. And Sayer is very articulate. He's a lovely human being. Just watch that interview. It's going to give you chills and it's going to thrill you. Then we go to Texas and we interview the health ranger himself, Mike Adams. Mike Adams is quite a figure in the activism with healthcare and all the things that are going on, especially with the malfeasance and the fraud and the deception that's going on. And I got to tell you, he was like an encyclopedia with all the knowledge in his head around all the things that were going on. So we have our interview with Mike Adams tomorrow also. So between Sayer G and Mike Adams, it's a big day. So not only get there to watch the interview, but make sure that you're alert and undistracted. You're going to want to see what these guys have to say. Again, share this information. Even though we're partway into the series now, it's not too late for people to join and get this for free. So there's a share button here. Click that share button. Get it to your friends and loved ones. Let more and more people know about GMOs Revealed, because the world needs to know about GMOs Revealed. Again, thanks for being with us, and I look forward to being with you again tomorrow.